All right, let's dive into something pretty fascinating today. The Nod-like receptor signaling pathway. It's like, the security system for all your cells, constantly on guard. We're looking at an article today from Assay Genie. They're a company like really on the cutting edge of biological research, and article's called Nod-like Receptor Signaling Pathway, a Keystone in Innate Immunity.
Yeah. And it really is a keystone. I mean, if you understand these NLRs, it helps you understand a ton of diseases and maybe even how to treat them.
Okay, so before we, really get into the details, can you just give me like the big picture? What are these nod-like receptors? Like, help me visualize it.
Okay. So imagine like these tiny little guards. They're inside every single one of your cells, always on the lookout for danger. These guards, the NLRs, they're a type of pattern recognition receptor, or PRR for short. They're proteins, but they're built to spot very specific danger signals. Like they can tell if something's a pathogen, and they can even tell if one of your cells is damaged.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. But what are these danger signals? How do the NLRs know when something's wrong?
Well, they're called PAMPs and DAMPs. PAMP stands for pathogen-associated molecular pattern. Basically, it's like the calling card of a bacteria or a virus.
Okay.
And then there's DAMPs, danger-associated molecular patterns. They're like the distress signals sent out by a cell that's been damaged,
Right.
one that's dying.
So it's like PAMs are like, hey, I'm a virus, I'm here to cause trouble. And the DAMPs are like, help, I'm dying.
Exactly. And the NLRs, they can hear both of those. They're ready to spring into action when they hear them.
So what happens then? I mean, an NLR hears one of those signals. Does it just like jump into attack mode? What happens?
Well, not quite. It's like a carefully choreographed dance, actually.
Right.
So first, the NLR, it binds to the PAMP or DAMP, kind of like a lock and key. And that binding, it triggers a change in the NLR's shape, which activates it.
Oh, so the binding is what flips the switch.
Exactly. And once it's been activated, things get really interesting. So some NLRs, they'll team up with other proteins. They form a complex called an inflammasome.
Inflammasome. Okay. That sounds kind of intense.
It is.
So this is where things start to like escalate, right? What exactly does this inflammasome do?
It's like the control center for a really powerful inflammatory response.
Yeah.
So one of the most important inflammasomes, it's called the NLRP3 inflammasome.
Okay.
And it's responsible for activating specific proteins that trigger the release of inflammatory molecules, like IL-1 and IL-18.
Oh, hold on. IL-1 and IL-18. Are those like the big guns, the ones that actually cause the inflammation?
Yeah, think of them like messengers. Powerful ones, they sound the alarm. They tell the immune system, like, hey, send all your troops over here to the site of infection or damage.
Okay, so let me just like summarize and make sure I'm getting this. NLRs are like sentinels. They're always scanning for these danger signals. And when they spot one, a PAMP or DAMP, then they're activated. Sometimes they form an inflammasome. And then the inflammasome, that's what triggers the release of these inflammatory molecules that call in the rest of the immune system. Did I get it?
You got it. That's a perfect summary of the NLR signaling pathway.
Okay, great. But, I have to ask, what happens when this whole system, it's so intricate? What happens when it goes wrong? I'm guessing that's where disease comes in.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So problems with NLR signaling, whether they're, overactive or they malfunction somehow, it can be linked to a ton of different diseases.
That's what I figured. Okay, let's dive into that. What are some of the specific diseases that are linked to this pathway? And how does it actually, manifest? What does it look like when it goes wrong?
Okay, so one area that's been studied a lot is the link between NLRs and inflammatory bowel diseases, or IBDs, like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis.
Right. IBDs, those chronic conditions, they affect the digestive system. What's the connection there?
Well, researchers have found that mutations in NLR genes, particularly a gene called NOD2, are strongly associated with these IBDs. So it seems like these mutations, they disrupt the balance of the gut microbiome.
Right.
And that leads to chronic inflammation in the intestines.
So it's like the NLRs are either, overreacting to normal gut bacteria, or they're not reacting strongly enough when they should be, and that creates this like ongoing inflammation.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And the impact of those mutations on the gut is pretty significant.
So it's like one tiny glitch in a single gene can have this massive impact on someone's health. It makes you realize just how interconnected everything is, right?
Right.
Are there other examples of specific NLR mutations that are linked to diseases?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's fascinating is how diverse these diseases are. There's a strong link between NLRs and autoinflammatory diseases.
Autoinflammatory disease. Remind me what those are again.
So those are conditions where the innate immune system, which includes these NLRs we've been talking about, they're overactive. So they cause this excessive inflammation, but there's no external trigger. It's like the body's internal alarm system is just stuck on, even when there's no real threat.
Okay, so it's not like an autoimmune disease where the immune system is attacking the body itself.
Exactly.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
different from that. It's more like the immune system is just too sensitive. It overreacts to things that shouldn't normally trigger a big response.
Okay, I see the distinction. Are there like specific autoinflammatory diseases that are linked to the NLR pathway?
Yeah. A classic example is gout. It causes that sudden, intense joint pain, often starting in the big toe. Turns out that NLRP3 inflammasome we talked about earlier, it plays a key role in gout.
Okay, so with gout, the NLRP3 inflammasome is just stuck on overdrive, sending out those inflammatory signals constantly.
Exactly. And those signals lead to the buildup of uric acid crystals in the joints. That triggers the painful inflammation. What's even more interesting is researchers are finding links between NLRs and a much wider range of conditions, like even autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis.
Oh, rheumatoid arthritis. That's where the immune system actually does attack the joints, right? How do NLRs fit into that?
It's still an area of active research, but it seems like NLRs might contribute to that chronic inflammation and joint damage you see in rheumatoid arthritis. It's probably a complex interplay of genetics and environmental things that kind of trigger that dysregulation in the NLR pathway.
So we've got IBDs, gout, rheumatoid arthritis, all linked to problems with NLRs. It's amazing how this one pathway can have such far-reaching effects. Are there any other diseases where NLRs are, suspects?
There are. And this is where it gets really interesting. Researchers are even finding links between NLRs and some seemingly totally unrelated conditions, like cancer.
Cancer? Wow. I thought the immune system was supposed to, fight cancer. How could NLRs, which are part of the immune system, be involved in cancer?
Yeah, it's a bit of a paradox, right? You'd think a robust immune response would be a good thing. And in some cases, NLRs do seem to have anti-tumor effects. But it's more complicated than that. Some NLRs have actually been found to promote tumor growth
Really?
or suppress the anti-tumor immune responses.
So wait, NLRs can be both the good guys and the bad guys in the fight against cancer. That seems so counterintuitive.
I know, right? But remember, the immune system is incredibly complex, and it's all about balance. Sometimes those same molecules that protect us can, under certain circumstances, contribute to disease.
This is getting complicated. It sounds like there's still a lot we just don't know about how NLRs function when it comes to cancer.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really active area of research. Scientists are trying to understand the nuances of how different NLRs can either promote or suppress tumors. The hope is that those insights will lead to new strategies for cancer treatment and prevention.
Yeah. I can see why this is such a compelling area of study. But we've covered IBDs, gout, rheumatoid arthritis, even cancer. Are there any other conditions on the NLR hit list?
Actually, yeah, one more area I want to touch on, and it might surprise you. Neurodegenerative diseases.
Neurodegenerative diseases, like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. What do those have to do with NLRs and the immune system?
That's a great question. It might seem like a stretch to connect the immune system to brain diseases, but emerging research suggests that NLRs could be involved in neuroinflammation.
Okay. Neuroinflammation. That's inflammation in the brain, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the thinking is that this chronic inflammation in the brain could contribute to the neuron damage you see in those diseases, like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So even though NLRs are usually thought of as part of that peripheral immune system, they might be playing a role in these complex brain disorders too.
Wow. So from our gut to our joints to our brain, it seems like NLRs are implicated in a remarkable number of diseases. It's mind-blowing to think that these tiny molecules inside our cells can have such a huge impact on our health.
Yeah, it really is. What's even more fascinating is we've only just begun to, scratch the surface of understanding how NLRs work and how we can potentially manipulate them to treat disease.
I bet that's where the real excitement lies, figuring out how to harness the power of NLRs for therapeutic purposes.
Absolutely. There's huge potential there, but also a lot of challenges. It's a rapidly evolving field.
Well, I'm definitely intrigued. We'll have to dive into those therapeutic implications more later on.
Definitely. There's a lot to unpack there. But first, I think we should take a closer look at some specific examples of how NLR research is already leading to new diagnostic tools and treatment strategies.
Okay, that sounds fascinating. I'm ready to hear more about how this, cutting-edge science is actually being used in the real world.
Yeah, it's like we have this amazing tool, right? This NLR signaling pathway, but we're still figuring out how to use it.
So let's talk about how we could use it. What are some ways that researchers are actually trying to manipulate this pathway to treat diseases? I mean,
One really promising approach is developing drugs that directly target specific NLRs. So you can imagine fine-tuning the immune response, blocking the ones that are causing too much inflammation,
hmm.
or even boosting the ones that are fighting disease.
So it's like you can adjust the sensitivity of that alarm system, make sure it's not too sensitive or too slow?
Exactly. And there are a few different ways to do this. So some researchers are focusing on developing drugs that actually inhibit the inflammasome,
Hmm.
preventing it from forming in the first place.
So you're cutting off communication before those inflammatory signals can go out.
Exactly. And there are already some drugs available that target the downstream molecules involved in the NLR pathway,
Oh, wait.
like those inflammatory messengers we talked about, IL-1 and IL-18.
Right, right. Blocking them would basically dampen the whole inflammatory response.
Exactly. It's like cutting off the fuel supply to the fire.
Right.
And these drugs are already being used to treat different inflammatory conditions, and they're showing a lot of promise.
It's amazing that we can already do that right, like actually modulate the immune response with that much precision.
Are there other strategies that people are exploring?
Yeah, there are. Remember how we talked about some NLRs having those anti-tumor effects? Well, researchers are looking at ways to boost those NLRs to help fight cancer.
So basically turning up the volume on the body's natural cancer-fighting systems. That's pretty cool.
It is, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
One of the biggest challenges with developing NLR-targeted therapies is specificity.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, the NLR pathway is so complex and they're involved in so many different things.
Yeah.
It must be hard to target one specific NLR without affecting a bunch of other stuff. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like you're trying to untie a huge knot. You want to loosen one strand without making the others tighter. And on top of that, we still don't fully understand the NLR signaling pathway. There's still so much we don't know about how these receptors are regulated and how they interact with everything else.
It's like we're trying to build a house without all the blueprints. We might make some progress, but we could also run into some serious problems later on. But despite all that, it sounds like there's a lot of optimism in this field. So where do you see NLR research going in the future?
Well, I think one of the most exciting areas is personalized medicine. Imagine being able to tailor treatments to someone's specific genes. Researchers are already finding specific genetic mutations and biomarkers that can actually predict how well someone will respond to an NLR-targeted therapy.
Wow. So in the future, doctors might be able to say, okay, based on your genes, this particular drug is the best one for you.
Exactly. It's about moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach and making treatments more personalized. And that's just one example. Another exciting area is the development of new tools and techniques to study these NLRs in more detail.
Like what kind of tools?
There's some incredible advancements in imaging techniques that are allowing scientists to actually see NLRs in action in living cells.
Wow.
It's like having a microscopic camera that can capture the immune system at work.
That's amazing. And I'm sure those kinds of tools will lead to even more discoveries and even better therapies.
I think we're on the cusp of a real revolution in how we understand and treat diseases, and NLR research is a big part of that.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be following this field, for sure. But before we get too carried away thinking about the future, let's just appreciate how much we've already learned about NLRs.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just a few decades ago, we didn't even know they existed. And now we're figuring out how they work and how to use them to develop new treatments.
It's pretty amazing what science can do. And speaking of amazing work, I have to mention the author of the article we've been talking about, Zainab Riaz. She's a PhD student in zoology. It's pretty cool to see a young scientist making such a big contribution to this field.
It really is. It shows you how important it is to support the next generation of scientists.
Well said. I think this has been a fantastic deep dive into the world of NLRs. We've explored how they work, how they impact our health, and all the exciting possibilities for the future.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's still so much to learn about the immune system.
Well, on that note, I think we've given our listeners plenty to think about.
Yeah, I think it's time to let all these ideas sink in.
So welcome back to the show. You know, it's been a pretty wild ride exploring the world of Nod-like receptors.
Yeah, we started with these tiny little guards inside our cells, and now we're talking about a whole network of immune responses and even potential treatments for serious diseases.
It's amazing how something so small can have such a huge impact, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what's even crazier is how much we still don't know about them.
Yeah, you know, throughout this whole deep dive, we've been talking about NLRs as if they're these independent actors, like making decisions about when to turn on and when to, you know, stay quiet.
Right, like they're running the whole show themselves.
But it's way more complicated than that, right?
Oh, yeah. It's not just about individual NLRs. It's about how they work together and how they interact with all the other molecules and pathways in the immune system.
It's like this giant web of connections with like all these signals and feedback loops going on
Yeah.
constantly.
And we're really just starting to understand how complex it all is.
Which makes me wonder, what does that mean for using NLRs to treat diseases? Like if we change one part of the system, how do we even know what's going to happen to everything else?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's something that researchers are really wrestling with as they try to develop new treatments. It's all about balance. We need to figure out how to target the right NLRs, but also make sure we're not messing up the whole immune system in the process.
It's like we need to start thinking about medicine more holistically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not just about one molecule or one pathway. It's about understanding how everything works together.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of NLRs, what's like the one big takeaway you'd want our listeners to remember?
I'd say it's this. The Nod-like receptor signaling pathway is a perfect example of just how intricate and amazing our bodies are. These tiny little guards, they do so much to keep us healthy. But when they go wrong, it can cause some serious problems.
And even though we've learned so much about NLRs already, we're really just getting started. There's so much more to discover. And who knows what kinds of incredible treatments we might be able to develop in the future. So to all our listeners out there, keep asking questions, keep learning, and never forget that the world inside you is just as amazing as the world outside.
Thanks for listening, everyone.